let me thank everybody for taking time out of their busy day. Um, and it, uh, I was looking for a history of Jews in Trenton, and I could find nothing. So I decided to do it myself. And there's some overarching questions as to what attracted Jews to Trenton. Trenton is like any other small town. And I've compared them to Schenectady, Rochester, Harrisburg, Elizabeth, Camden, Passaic, Patterson. It's virtually identical in terms of the way that the Jewish community started. It did not work. Trenton had an enormous manufacturing business. They specialized in rubber. They specialized in ceramics, not only earthenware, plates and such, but sanitary ceramics, such as bathtubs. So that when indoor plumbing came in, they were busy, and indoor plumbing came in around in the 19-teens, 1920s. Don't sell that short. I asked my aunt when there was a landing on the moon. My aunt was born in the 1890s at the time. What was the most important thing that you've seen in your time? And there's been a lot of stuff, including roads and whatever. She said indoor plumbing. Initially, the Jews were not involved with the big manufacturers. Sam and I talked about Roebling, and Roebling in 1900 employed 1 out of every 3 people. Oftentimes, big manufacturers would go into Europe and recruit. There was in 1882 that was restricted by the federal government, but they still did it. The Jews initially were peddlers of the manufacturing from Trenton. To give you an example, Albert Stark, who's a prominent attorney, his grandfather used to sell earthenware, ceramics, seconds in New York. He went to Trenton, and he went to New York. Then New York had a plague, and he moved to Trenton. So that the Stark family moved to Trenton for that reason. Number one, there were goods, and number two, there was a plague of yellow fever. Trenton was the capital of the United States for a year when they had yellow fever in Philadelphia. They moved the capital to Trenton. After a while, they got enough money to open up stores and sell goods. I can only tell you about my grandfather and his 4 brothers. They started out as peddlers. They went from Trenton to Lambertville to Flemington, back to Trenton in a week. They opened stores. One of them still around, the one in Lambertville, the hardware store. It's over 30 years old. But they all opened up dry goods stores. The Jewish professionals were practically nil who immigrated here. People who immigrated, the Jews who immigrated, were poor. They were poor. They had to make themselves. They had to make themselves in the new country. Second generation, they found education, but the first generation was tough. They lived, for the most part, at least the Russians. There are three waves of immigration. One were the Sephardics, those people who were from Spain initially. They were expelled in 1492, but they went to a lot of them went to Holland, and there were Dutch colonies in the Caribbean. And the first Jew in Trenton was David Nahr. He owned the Trenton Gazette. He was prominent in politics. His family was from Portugal by way of St. Thomas. And then the German Jews started to come in the 1840s and 1850s. Most of the Germans became proprietors of menswear. So they owned stores, and they were very prominent in the community. But the first, you'll see that the first cemetery was in 1857, and it's in Trenton on Broome Street. So it's still there. So they had a congregation actually before in people's houses, but they incorporated the cemetery in 1857, and then they incorporated themselves in 1858. Okay, so here we go. The Germany and Austria, and in Russia, the Pale of the Settlement. Now, 75% of the Pale of the Settlement, which is here, this Jews are restricted only in a certain area in Russia. The Russian Empire was humongous. It still is. And this is now Belarusia and the country that is at war. So you know, that was all. It was about 15% Jewish. Some towns were more than that, obviously. World War II, the Nazis basically extinguished the Jewish population. But most of the people who came to Trenton were from Grodno or Minsk or Vitebsk or Kovno or Courland, in the upper part on what would be Belarusia. Then they settled in South Trenton. Now, South Trenton was an Irish neighborhood. South Trenton was a poor neighborhood. It's in a bad location. If the river ever overflows, South Trenton overflows. And I have the names of some of the people who live there. Actually, they own stores, and they all lived above the stores. So that was the way that it was. They started in the 1880s, and this was up until probably 1920. They were in South Trenton, from Lamberton Street, Union Street, which is no more, and Decatur Street, which is no more. So they established Jewish institutions. The first Orthodox Russian synagogue was in 1883, Brothers of Israel. Then there was a breakaway in 1901 called the People of Truth. That was on Union Street. So was the Brothers of Israel, was on Union Street. And then 3 doors away was the Workers of Truth, small synagogue, Orthodox Russian synagogue, and that opened in 1905. And then we had a different ethnic group. We had a Hungarian. Mostly the Germans belonged to Har Sinai. Okay, they were all Orthodox. There weren't any denominations in Judaism at that time. Ahavath Israel was the Hungarian shul, and they used to pay their dues in Hungarian money. Then we got to move out of South Trenton when people had some money, and the trolley line was extended to the Cadwalder Park area, which is a whole other thing. You ought to do something on Cadwalder Park. It was designed by the same landscape designer that designed Central Park in New York, among other things. It's a gem. It's an absolute gem. And the whole building in the western part of Trenton was built around Cadwalder Park. Okay. They had the Jews had certain eating patterns, so they had 8 kosher butchers and 6 kosher bakers. And the Talmud Torah means that they had a religious school, which they 100 before the Common Era, there was a law that the people should be educated, and the education was important. This is an example. It's a recent picture, but well, fairly recent. You see the cars of what the housing looked like. This is Union Street to Ferry Street. This is a synagogue, a rendering of the synagogue of the Workers of Truth. This is the small synagogue. This was Achenu B'nai Israel, which is translated Brothers of Israel, 1885, 1881, somewhere in that area. My great-grandfather, who I never met, was the president of that synagogue, as well as the president of the People of Truth. On Market and Jackson Streets, which now you see a bar, it is a bar. I don't know what it was then, but that's the way it looked. There's the store here, and above it, people lived. Okay, this is Cohn's Bakery. This was on Market Street, and next to it was Kunis's Bakery, not to be outdone. All right, there was also Kramer's Bakery, which I don't have a picture of, but Kramer is still in business. And then we have a store owned by Morris Olinsky on Union Street, and this is a picture of what it looked like. 2 stories. You can see it above, near the roof, the name Olinsky, and the store below, and the Venetian blinds were the living space. Market Street. This is another picture of Market Street. It's not a good picture, but kosher butcher. Now, and this is a warehouse in the area on Cooper Street. When people got here, they had skills. They had skills in the trades. The problem is that nobody would allow them in the trades. The guilds were ruled by the nativists, and they certainly wouldn't allow Jews into their profession. So what the Jews did, besides peddling and commercial areas, went to school. In 1915, where the Jews were no more than 2.5% of the population of Trenton, but in 1915, that there are 0 accountants. There are 0 accountants because the 13th amendment for taxation was passed in 1914, so there was no income tax at the time. 6% were physicians. That was 3 times the population of Trenton. 12% were lawyers, and law to Jews came very easily because there is such a thing as Jewish law, which is the foundation really of Anglo-Saxon law, with precedent and rules of evidence and whatever. It's similar. So that was easy. I had a friend, it was my father's friend actually, who went to he went to a yeshiva in New York for high school, and he went to school from 7 to 5. 7 in the morning to 5 in the afternoon, 6 days a week. They had off for the Sabbath. And then he went to the Wharton School of Pennsylvania, and he said, I had 2 classes a day. It was simple. So he got along well. There were a lot of druggists because Jews, for whatever reason, were not allowed to go to medical school. And the only thing I could point to is in 1920 there was a study done at CCNY of the people who applied to medical school, non-Jews. 75% got into medical school. Jews were 20%, and NYU turned out the same kind of student. So you had that discrimination to overcome. 1935, it got better in terms of the schooling and the professions. The accountants all of a sudden were 36%. Remember, this is 2.5% of the community, right? The physicians were 13%, the lawyers were 25%. And then in 1956, I did 46, but in 1956, almost half of the accountants were Jewish. A quarter of the physicians were Jewish. 37% of the attorneys were Jewish, and 20% of the druggists. A lot of the druggists were denied entry into medical school, so they're always druggists. They established philanthropic and social institutions besides synagogues. The people who came over, who were immigrants, were not all that observant. They were observant because everybody in their community was observant, but they weren't really that observant. But so what they did is that they had they set up a mutual aid society. They set up a Democratic club. They set up they set up a Republican club. They set up the cemeteries. They set up a mikveh, which is a Jewish ritual bath. They set up the kachunki. What's the kachunki? Let's say that's where the high rollers went to gamble. And then you had other organizations. You had the Workingmen's Circle, and you had the YMHA, and the YMHA actually was very beneficial because it got together the German Jews, the Russian Jews, and the Hungarian Jews, and they had one place to meet, and they could bridge the gaps in the cultures. I have the fall of Trenton's economy, which is arguable, but it started really in the 1920s when Roebling. Remember, Roebling was this huge company who also had they also own the majority of Otis Elevator, and while those skyscrapers were going up in New York and Philly and wherever, the elevators were Otis elevators, and they used the Roebling steel. And then after World War II, we saw that there are a lot of mergers and acquisitions of national companies. What generally happened is that the company that was based in Trenton, the home company, no longer was based in Trenton. Roebling was now Colorado Fuel and Iron, so they had Denver, no Trenton. So they lost, besides ratables, they lost big givers to the Trenton community. In the third generation, you see the increases in the professions, and then you have the 40 Jewish philanthropic organizations, and by this time there was a conservative movement, a reform movement, and there were down to 2 Orthodox synagogues. Now, here's where I get a problem. I wrote the book, and I didn't put live people in there because I was told that when you write a history, the people who are not in it get sore. So I didn't. So these people are for the most part dead. There are a couple that are alive, but these are famous Jewish personalities. I don't know if you know that Judge Foreman was appointed in the 1920s. He was a federal judge. Sidney Goldman was the first leader of the Jewish Historical Society. He was a judge for years in the state government. Benjamin Kaufman, who's my uncle, was a Congressional Medal of Honor winner in World War I. And he was also the national commander of the Jewish war veterans during the Second World War. Saul Weinstein was a comic writer. He wrote Bagels and Lox, or Goldfinger or Locks or something like that. He was a funny guy. Alex Eagle was a director for early TV in the 50s. Saul Linowitz was the CEO of Xerox. And then he became the head of the Organization of American States. Judith Light is still around. She's won Tonys on Broadway. Zalman King, it was Zalman Lefkowitz when I went to school with him, but he became Zalman King. He was a director. Richard Kind is still around. You'll see him from time to time. Levins, both of the Henry Levin and Peter Levin were in show business. Both of them very prominent, but very prominent in the 30s and 40s. All right, before our time. Mike Bloom was probably the best sports person to come out of Trenton. Nobody heard of him because he played basketball from the early 30s to the early 50s. But he was All-American at Temple, and he played pro ball before the NBA. The NBA started in 1951. Tal Brody is still around and lives in Israel. And he was he was drafted in the NBA for the NBA, but he played for Israel on the Maccabi team in the Olympics, and they won in 1981. They won the European Cup. Tony Siegel was a vice president. He was in baseball for 40 years. And he was the vice president at the end of his career with the San Francisco Giants. So he has a couple of World Series rings, which are pretty gaudy. And Amy Robinson is also in show business, and she was from a very prominent family in Trenton. She's still around. So that's the scope. I mean, there's a lot of information that I could talk a long time on all of this stuff, but if there are any questions directed, I would appreciate it. The Trenton community is symbolic of a lot of other small communities. It's unlike New York or Chicago or Philadelphia or Detroit. So it's almost identical. The only thing that Trenton did passed over that most of the Jewish communities had was the needle trades. For whatever reason, the needle trade, they had some in the needle trade, but in New York in the 19 teens, about 2/3 of the people worked in the garment industry. That passed over Trent. I don't know why.
So I see that Ann Blumenthal had a question. I don't know, Ann, if you can unmute yourself and ask it, or I can try to read it from the chat. Says I can read it, so let me find it here. Why did several of the Trenton synagogues have truth in their names, and was that common elsewhere?
That was common. The word emes is truth, and the Anshi emes or the Anshi Fife were they were just common names of synagogues. I mean, Brothers of Israel was really Achenu B'nai Yisrael, and I didn't want to say that today because nobody would understand. But it means Brothers of Israel.
Questions from here? Anyone have question or comment?
You mentioned that the Justice Complex replaced the old neighborhood.
Yes.
I'm kind of interested in that transition. Apparently the Jewish population left, but I assume the houses were still here until whenever the
19
complex or the clearance or urban renewal or whatever
Right,
that neighborhood up.
right.
So,
Yeah.
so were they
After the, well, in the 1930s, there wasn't much movement in because of the Depression, but those who were rich enough, stable enough, did move, and they moved into areas that were developed adjacent to Cadwalder Park. Moved into the western section, and our son and I built a synagogue in 1928 in the western section, and then Adath Israel built a synagogue around 1950 that was down the street. So they were the two large synagogues in Trenton. They had moved to the western section where Jewish people were.
So I'll say a little bit more about the transition of the neighborhood.
Yeah.
That the map that Mr. Finkle showed with had the Lamberton Street, Union and Decatur. That little neighborhood was literally, we are right across from where those streets were. And the Justice Complex is on top of those streets.
Right.
By the time that all happened, by urban renewal in the late 50s, 60s, it had become mostly an African-American neighborhood. And that neighborhood, along with other things in the central corridor of Trenton, was redlined. The Federal Housing Administration during the New Deal had set up, I think many of you know, had set up a rating system for neighborhoods based on things like the percent African-American, the percent immigrant, the average income, and so on. And so certain neighborhoods were said to be red, in other words, high risk for loans and so on. So there became to be disinvestment. But by that time, as Art says, many of the Jewish people had moved. I did see another question. Carol, did you have a question? I thought I saw your hand up.
I just wanted to say, this is kind of like a joke, but after this program, why don't we all go to Weinstein's for a corned beef sandwich? Because that was, oh my gosh, that's, you know, on the lighter side, not really, it was fattening, but how long is Weinstein's gone from the Lawrence Shopping Center, would you say?
Wouldn't you say 20 years?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and Weinstein's was what there in South Trenton. There was Fox's,
yeah.
Delicatessen, and there was Siegel's Delicatessen. Alex Siegel, the director, that his parents don't own that. Then Weinstein's, when the Jewish population moved to West Trenton, to the western part of the town, Weinstein's opened on Hermitage Avenue.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, you know, and, you know, fortunately or unfortunately, I was there.
Right.
So we have a couple of questions from here, actually several questions from here. I'm gonna let my person who's been so generous with this tech support ask the first one.
So the community moved to West Trenton, is it still there or eventually it left West Trenton as well?
So the question, Art, was whether the Jewish community that moved to the West Trenton and set up the synagogues there, and I remember them on Bellevue Avenue, what happened after that?
After that, I'll give you a little vignette. I taught religious school in the 60s, which is a thankless job because the kids don't want to be there. So trying to teach them is tough. In any event, in 1964, about half of them lived in Trenton. In 1966, about 10% lived in Trenton. So there were the riots, and that was a real demarcation. I had a cousin who was in Trenton High School in '67, and they had riots in Trenton High School. So it was such that they moved. Now, eventually, the fourth generation moved to adjacent areas such as Ewing and Lower Makefield, Yardley, Princeton.
Mhm.
The
Another-
synagogues are, they're now one of them's the synagogue.
Yeah, I think both of the synagogues you mentioned, one is now a church, a Christian church of some kind.
Yeah.
Don't know what that's Har Sinai that was right across from.
Yeah, Har Sinai is a church, but the first synagogues were churches. Har Sinai's first synagogue on Willow Street was a Methodist church. And I think the Brothers of Israel synagogue, I'm talking about the 1880s, was also a church. So, it's kind of, they're very holy places.
They're well known.
Our Sinai sold to the church. And they moved to a property they bought in Pennington.
Yes.
Har Sinai moved to Pennington. They're a shadow of what they used to be.
What synagogue is it?
That was a comment about what synagogue isn't. Yeah, and that's true of many church dominant or Christian denominations as well. Pat, you had a question?
Yeah, I don't think Mr. Finkle mentioned it, but wasn't there a very small synagogue on Montgomery Street, right around the corner from the library?
Did you hear that, Art?
Yeah, I don't think so. There was a small synagogue in back of the Greenwood House on Greenwood Avenue. But that was really for the residents of the Greenwood House, which is a facility for the seniors. Greenwood House now is in Ewing Township. It's still named Greenwood House, but it was on Greenwood Avenue, and there was a synagogue there. It was small, but it was utilized. I have all the incorporations of synagogues and all the other Jewish organizations, for that matter, and it's in the book. But there is one congregation that I have the articles of incorporation, but it never got off the ground, and it was right before the Anshe MSO that opened, the People of Truth. So I suspect that there is that Brothers of Israel got too populated, and they formed another congregation.
Another question from here. Yes.
My question is of Greenwood House and its role in the history of the Jews of Trenton.
Okay, so we've now I don't think I heard clearly, Art. So Greenwood House was set up for, was it for
The aged.
the aged? Okay, got it.
The aged. Yeah, that's part of the Jewish culture, to care for the aged, the infirm, the poor, and that had been there for a long time on Greenwood Avenue. There used to be a Jewish population on Greenwood Avenue, in the Wilbur section, but And there used to be Brothers of Israel had moved there, right in back of where you get into the railroad station, and if you go the back way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And Greenwood House was right at the end, right at the corner of where that synagogue was.
Carol, I think I saw that your hand was up again.
Yeah, I seem to be bringing up the food questions. I think I need to join Weight Watchers. But Kramer's Bakery is now in Yardley. Is that the same Kramer's, right?
No, I know the owner of Kramer's Bakery. His name actually was Cranmer, which was the first Archbishop of the Anglican Church.
Oh, because like if I need things, I'm Jewish, obviously. So if I need special like breads and cakes for the holidays, I go to Yardley because they have challahs
yeah.
and stuff. So I just thought it was like from the Trenton area that they moved over.
They have the dietary laws, which generally I would say 85% of the Jews don't follow anymore. I do, but most people don't. There are certain restrictions certainly with meat, but also with dairy products, and those people who keep those dietary rules need a sanction supervision by rabbi.
So just one more question, Mr. Finkle. So is the Kramer's Bakery that you say is still in existence somewhere? Where is it?
Kramer's Bakery is it was in Chambersburg. Now I think it's in Hamilton Township.
It is, okay, because we used to go to the Greenwood Avenue one and wait online like Saturday night, like 12 o'clock
Oh
at night.
yeah,
To get the hot
you get
bagels.
warm bagels.
Yeah,
or warm,
it was crazy. It was
right.
so much fun.
Yeah.
Okay, Weight Watchers, I'm joining tomorrow.
Any other questions? This has been fascinating.
Just one more.
Yes.
I was looking at his list of famous people. I didn't, or maybe I'm mistaken. I thought Mo Berg came from Trenton.
Mo Berg.
Mo Berg.
Mo Berg.
Mo Berg was a famous baseball player, spy.
Yeah. The catcher was a spy.
Yeah.
Moberg was a famous baseball player, but he wasn't from Trenton.
No.
Oh,
No.
all right, right. We'll claim him, right?
Yeah.
All right. Any others? Thank you so much, Mr. Finkle. And we have recorded this and we'll try to make it nice and put it on our website for people who couldn't come in today. And I really look forward to you working with this student at the College of New Jersey and helping him tell more of the story, even you know, with all of your background of our neighborhood, which was right across the street from where we are now.
Right. Thank you. Sam is going to coordinate that. He has my number and email and my DNA and all the other things. So I do want to communicate with the student at the College of New Jersey. I have 2 students from Princeton that I'm working with that are doing parts of the history of Trenton.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, we have to keep in touch with you about that so that those students will learn from them too. Thank you again. Thank you everyone who joined us today. And stay tuned for more things from us and we will be back in touch with you. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Good night.
Okay. Bye-bye.